Hey everyone, and welcome to Diary of a Sales Engineer. I'm Ryan Kruger, and I'm here with my co-host Samir Kosser.
We're super stoked to be here again, another week, another podcast. Last week we talked about how to break into sales engineering, and this week we're really focused on you got the job, now what? So today's all about how do I tackle those first 30 days, first 60 days, first 90 days, and beyond. And to kick us off, Ryan, imagine you just signed the contract, you got the counter signature. What are we doing next?
Well, first things first, whenever you get a new contract for a new job, you have to celebrate. That is easily the first place you got to go with is celebrate the opportunity to start a new job. Obviously, you were looking for some reason, so be excited about the new opportunity itself. But after the celebration is completed, it is time to get focused on what to do next. Now, in most situations, people will give 2 weeks before they leave a current job. In the technology world, it's very common that when you put in your 2 weeks, that day might just be your last day. It really depends on where you're at, and also depends on where you're going to. So be ready to know that you might be giving 2 weeks, but it might actually end that day that you actually put in your 2 week notice itself. After you put in your notice, depending on if you have some time between jobs, I always like to take that time to reset myself personally, get refocused, re energized towards the next job, but also start doing some research on the job itself. So if you're going into a new industry, I would start studying that new industry. Maybe pick up a book on some industry best practices, take a look at some competitor websites, or also just go through what's available on YouTube for the specific company that you are ultimately joining. Now, on day one of being at the company, you're already prepared to some degree. You're obviously going to start your onboarding process, which will look different for every single company that you are at. And I can tell you that in my experience, that has looked entirely different from each place. So it does depend on ultimately where you're going to and what that looks like. But, try to get ready in those first couple of weeks, and then just be ready to go from day one because you don't know what to expect. I can tell you at my current role, I was thrown into the fire relatively very fast. A lot of places you go to, you would expect to have some time before you're demo ready and certified to go. I would say within 10 business days, I was demo certified, ready to be on customer facing calls because the business called for more sales engineers to be giving those different product demonstrations. So it was really important for us to get ready as fast as we can. What that meant was days and days and days of preparation and some nights included where I had to be practicing, rehearsing, getting ready for the role. At other organizations that you may go to, that can look a lot different because you might have onboarding where you're meeting with different teams and you're actually given a longer period to get ready and get demo certified. But that's why it's important that if you have some time prior to the job to start preparing for it because you never know what you're going to expect, especially as you get into the opportunity itself.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with that. I think one thing I would add is make sure that you have a signed contract before you say anything to your current employer. I've had friends who've had horror stories where they got the verbal, they got excited, they shared it with their current company. A few days later, it fell through. So, nothing is official until it's official. We say that about deals. We say that about getting a new job. So, verbal's very exciting, but don't properly celebrate until you have that DocuSign e-signature or you have that signature there where it's a legally binding contract. But to Ryan's point, be ready to jump into the fire. Your first 90 days are where you can make a name for yourself in the company. All they know of you, about you, is your interview process, which is going to be tops 4 hours maybe worth of time with your hiring manager. And that's probably the most intimate person you're going to be with. Showing up excited, having the energy, having the desire to learn really quickly will put you ahead very fast. And I think some things, especially some of these things are going to be more geared towards sales engineers, but this is more broadly speaking. I would say I remember my first week at every company that I've worked with, try to reach out to everyone I possibly can in the leadership team on Slack. And I can play oh, I'm new here trying to get to know people. When you're at a smaller startup, less than 100 people, you can ping the CEO and saying, "Hey, would love to, just join the team. Super excited. Would love to talk. You have 15 minutes. Put a name to the face, especially in this remote world where everyone is just an icon on Slack. That's your opportunity to start making a name for yourself, making that personal brand within the company of, oh yeah, I remember when Samir first joined. He actually like pinged me and introduced himself, and now I can put a name to the face. And so I think showing that personality or those small things will add up down the line, and you can do that regardless of whatever job you are joining.
I can speak to that for you too. It's something I noticed as you started at our company was I picked up on that you already were branching out and reaching out to other individuals. And it was something that I definitely took and put into my toolkit. And something that I like to do, especially now, is that as we do have new hires onto our sales team, one thing that I would encourage is trying to schedule time with other individuals, at least a part of your core team as well. For us as sales engineers, obviously one thing that we need to do is have really good relationships with our account executives. And so even as new account executives come on to our team, I like to put 30 minutes, 1 hour on their calendar where I'm not only getting to know them from a professional level, but on a personal level. Because the more cohesiveness that we have on a call, the more likelihood we will to have more success together. So I do think it's important that the people that you are going to be directly working with, you do want to establish some kind of relationship, especially if you're at a smaller company. When you're at a larger company, obviously that becomes a little bit more difficult, but still reach out and schedule time to meet with other people. Ask them to get on a virtual cup of coffee. 30 quick minutes with somebody can entirely change how your relationship looks and feels. In today's virtual world, it's not always likely that you're going to be able to meet every single person in person. So the more that you can actually talk and get to know someone, the better off you're going to be to have a really strong relationship. And then guess what? When you do have questions that come up for that team or that individual, they're willing to help you out because they've gotten to know you on that personal level. So I do think it's something really important. Another piece that I'll say about getting started at a company, you talked about learning the product itself. A lot of different products will have product repositories or knowledge bases. There's a lot of different knowledge tools that exist out there, from Google to Guru, etc. And one thing that's a pet peeve for me is when I receive a question from somebody as they're just getting started off at the organization and they're like, hey, can the product do XYZ? And I go into our Guru and I type in XYZ and there the answer is. So try to do a little bit of research on your own before reaching out to other individuals. I would typically say like most people are very, very receptive to this idea of, hey, I did some research. I couldn't find the answer. Would you mind helping me out? Everyone's like, of course, I want to help you out. But when we have those answers available in that knowledge repository, spend 2 seconds, look and see if you can get the answer first before shooting off a Slack message, because other teams and other people are busy. So to get bogged down in questions that are readily available does get annoying. So as you're out there, go through the materials that are available to you. Try to learn them as best you can. Then when you have questions based on the materials, reach out to the right individuals, the right teams that you need to.
I think that's an excellent point, especially because those repositories have taken folks time to build up. And so when you show that you have leverage, you've exhausted all your resources and still can't find your answer, being like, hey, I checked this Guru article, link the article, I still am confused about XYZ. One, it shows that you are self-sufficient. Two, it shows that you're not going to come to them with just bullshit questions. Like you're coming to them with level 2, level 3 questions that the answer is not available. And 9 times, 10 times out of 10, they'll be like, that's actually an excellent point. I did not think of it that way. We should probably update the article to include that. Like, great. So you are already, although you don't know the product or you don't know the company, you are already adding value because you are trying to learn it. So now the next person who comes after you is trying to learn it has a more comprehensive, database of information to learn from. And to that point, I think leveraging call recordings is a huge game up. If you have Gong or you have Zoom recordings, or even asking from this kind of more of an SE perspective or an AE perspective, even asking your manager, hey, what does a great sales call look like? Do we have recordings that I can consume? And when you are trying to figure out your own demo flow and you're trying to figure out the product, it's like, hey, how's Ryan, who's top tier SC on the team right now, who's killing it? How's he demoing? What is he focusing on? What are the types of questions he's asking? and being able to see that and consume those things early on can really help you accelerate that ramp time, and beat that average time of 3 months, 6 months to be fully ramped, and bring it down to 4 weeks,
It's
6 weeks.
such a great point, Samir. Like, this is something that I really, really like is number one, the videos that are out there, especially as a sales engineer. Okay, if there is an existing SE out there, go find some recordings, find the demo flow that they have. Start putting it together in your head and in your notes. What does your demo script look like? Now, as an SE, we shouldn't be going off a script, but you should build that script as you get started as an SE at a new company. So that way you have it to leverage and practice on to get better at on what your flow looks like. Also, don't necessarily just take what the other sales engineer has done as gospel. Build your own flow. So if you see an aspect of their demo that you think can be, improved, change that flow around. Don't be afraid to take some liberties there on what you're going to say and what you're going to do. Just because there's an existing demo flow that's out there doesn't mean that it's the most ideal demo flow in every situation. So you have to figure out how it is that you personally and authentically want to actually give that demonstration yourself. Another thing that I see very commonly too, when you're watching a lot of recordings, what happens is you're going to pick up on the way that somebody responds to something. Now, the way they respond to something is not necessarily the way that Ryan should respond to something, the way Samir should respond to something. You need to figure out what your voice is and how you would handle a common objection. Sometimes you might steal something verbatim, word for word. But in other cases, you'll hear it and say, I like this, but here's how I would explain it. And that's totally fine. Every sales engineer should have their own, flair, so to speak, on how they give a demonstration. There's no one right way or wrong way to give a demo. But when you're just taking something and repeating it, then why not just give them a recording of what the original sales engineer did? So you got to find your own authenticity as you're getting onboarded and what your demo flow looks like. There'll be some nuances, but play around with what it looks like.
Yeah, I think that something that stuck out to me as you were talking about that was generating your demo script. And as a new SC, you're in a unique position where you have new eyes on how the demo is going in versus the seasoned SCs who have been there. They're almost at this point almost on autopilot to a certain degree because they are just ripping these demos 5, 6, 7, 10 times a week, and they just are going with the flow. But you're brand new, you have a new set of eyes, a new set of perspective. You're almost not like indoctrinated within how we're supposed to do demos yet, and so leverage that. Question, hey, why are we doing it in this order? You'll get two answers. One is we tried doing it in the other order, it didn't work. Or two is actually we don't know why we're doing it in this order. It was just how we've been doing it. Let's try doing it in a different order. And so I think having that what is it called, like the novice perspective, or like just the new eyes allows
the fresh eyes on it. Yeah, fresh eyes on it, right? Some new perspective is probably the way to say it. I think there's even a couple music albums out there called New Perspective, right? And that's what you want to bring when you come into a new organization. Or you were hired for a specific reason. So you're there to come and bring your expertise to the team. Don't be afraid to speak up and say, why are we doing it this way versus another way? Or if you see something on your team that's maybe not working optimally, that you've seen in previous jobs work a little bit better, not only raise your hand and say, hey, I think we could be doing this better, but put the time and energy in to actually build the different materials to make it better. Why just accept the status quo? If you're at a company, the goal is to drive it forward with your team, make it better. And so one of the easiest things that you can do is just simply question and be curious as to why are things the way they are. When I was at previous company XYZ, the way they did it, I thought it worked pretty well. I'm noticing here that it's not working really well. I might even have some knowledge on how to build a deck or a presentation around doing something a little bit better. Let me build that out. Let me bring that to my manager and my larger team and say, hey, look, here's what I have. I'm just curious your thoughts on if we could maybe try it this way. Maybe you try it that way and you start to notice that it works really well. That's exactly why you're getting brought in, is for that fresh new perspective to your team. So remember, the experience you have prior to the job is very, very valuable to the company that you're going to.
100%. Most of the time, you're not brought into a company just to be a passive, person on the train. You are brought into a company because they want you to be taking an active role. Don't be afraid to take that active role. Well, the worst that can happen is it doesn't work and you go and figure that out. I think that there's a lot of quotes out there that talk about, doing something is better than doing nothing. Because if you do something that's incorrect, now that doesn't work. I think Edison said, one of the reporters asked him, how does it feel to like fail 1,000 times before figuring out how the one time that light bulb worked? He responds with, well, I just figured out 1,000 ways that it didn't work. And like understanding that that is part of the process is something that once I got over, then I got more, I don't want to say aggressive, but like I just got more curious of trying something new and not afraid of, is this going to work or not? I have no idea if it's going to work. Shit, let's try it. Oh, that was awesome. That worked out. That didn't, my hypothesis was incorrect. I said this line that I thought would get laughs and I got crickets. Okay, that's totally fine. The beauty of that too is that the audience doesn't know what lines you're workshopping. Comedians go to random clubs all the time to work on their set. Nobody knows what's gonna actually end up in their final set. They're trying new material all the time. So I think that trying new things, especially as like a new employee, will show that you're hungry. You're trying to make a name. You're trying to make an impact. Trying to push the company forward. And that kind of want to take a shift of some like actionable things of like first 30 days, right? We talked about learning the product. We talked about branching out and meeting different people on different teams. Ryan, if we like dig into like different people of different teams, what would be your advice of, should I be reaching out to like the leaders of every team or someone who's on my level? Like how have you approached meeting different people from different teams when you first join an organization within the first 30 days?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. Like I said, when you joined, I definitely picked up on some tips and tricks from you on how you're reaching out to different aspects of leadership. I'm more of like the reach out to the core internal team next to me, but watching you do that really kind of opened me up, and I was like, okay, I need to be doing these things as well, because I do want to get to know our head of marketing. I do want to get to know our head of product and integrations and security. And I think one of the easiest ways to approach that is by simply just saying, hey, I'm new to the team here. Do you want to join for a virtual cup of coffee? How many times are you getting rejected from a virtual cup of coffee? I honestly cannot imagine that anybody at your company will reject you from that offer. If they do, I don't know, maybe surface that to somebody else. But look, it's an easy way to just get somebody on a call for 30 minutes. You might learn a nugget about the product or the technology, but you might also get a nugget about them personally. So that way you can connect on a little bit of a deeper level. And that way, when you do have those questions, again, it's so helpful to know what resource to reach out to, and to know that when you reach out with the question, they're going to be there to support you. That happens after those virtual cups of coffee. Otherwise, they don't know who's sending them the question. They don't know who you are, especially if it's a little bit larger of an organization. Somebody reached out to me. I don't even know who this person is. I'm actually busy. I'll get to it later. But if they know you and they know, oh, you know what? Ryan's our new sales engineer. Of course, he wants to know maybe our integration standards. Yeah, I'm happy to get that information over to him. So things like that are really easy to do. I mean, Samir, what are some tips that you have on just meeting some other people at the org?
I think coming from a place of curiosity is very helpful. You're never going to get turned down for being curious. If you go up to the head of product and say, hey, I'm new here, really want to understand what's the history of the product and where we're going. That's head of product's gonna be passionate about that. He or she is gonna want to talk about that because that's their day to day. That you get them talking about what they're excited. Easy way for them to want to come and talk to you. And then as you are talking to the various different folks, now you're able to start building almost like a mental model of the company, because every company has its own little intricacies within it. There's their own politics. You have your own communication, where we actually have a dedicated integration team at company A, but at company B, the integrations were built by the SEs. And it's like, that's way different. Marketing has a huge role and influence on the sales cycle at company A, but company B, marketing is not really that big of a deal and it's not that important. So being able to talk to various different peoples from various different teams, and then asking them what their role is, how does it fit into the overall company. That'll give you an understanding. And then I always like asking like fun facts or, hey, outside, we have 30
Mhm.
minutes. I'll try to take the last like 10 minutes, be like, put work aside. What do you like doing for fun? Or if you were to retire right now, what job would you pursue? Ryan, you actually have a bunch of these great questions.
Yeah.
That you call them your wedding table or your reception dinner table questions. But if you could share some of those to ask, because I think you hit it perfectly. If you can get on a personal level with your new team members, you'll be able to, they're gonna help. They're gonna be more willing to help. It's like, oh yeah, Ryan asked me that really interesting question. I'll take 5 minutes to shoot him over the integration guide. But if you have some of
Yeah.
those questions, yeah, share a few of them. I think those are great.
I will. I think I'll share the story about how I came up with this idea first and foremost was me and my wife were heading to an Indian wedding. And for those unfamiliar with the Indian wedding, it takes a few days. So I knew the people that we were going to be sitting at a table with, we had to get to know pretty well because we were going to be hanging out with them quite a bit. So heading into the night, I decide I want to come up with all of these random, obscure questions to just try to prompt the individuals at my table to get to know them a little bit better. And so next thing you know, I start asking questions like, what's the best gift you received in the last year for under $20? And so you're challenging them to think about what that answer is, or maybe what's the best concert you've ever been to, or first concert you've been to. So that way you get to know a little bit about their music taste. And you can really play around with what those different sort of descriptions are, different questions, and really try to make the individual think about, man, I've never actually been asked a question like, what's my favorite dessert if no one's watching? Because they have to sit down and think about what that is. And the answers to that question, I will tell you, are so fascinating. Some of the answers I've received are insane. And then you want to ask so many more questions. You're just curious. You're like, wait a second, I want to get to know you better. Somebody told me about how they made s'mores in a bowl one day. And I was like, it sounds amazing. I have to try it at some point in time. But it allowed us to develop a much deeper bond and relationship a lot quicker. And so these are the kinds of questions that I especially like to ask my reps as we sit down for that first 30-minute call. I want to know not only maybe what motivates you, but some of those oddball questions because I want to get to know you personally. If I know you personally, then what happens are when we're on a call or a demonstration together, I know that maybe the prospect said something and then I got a joke about it because I know you really like that certain thing or you maybe hate that certain thing. And then it becomes this natural, fun place where our demonstrations stand out because there's a level of authenticity in the demo that other companies maybe aren't achieving because it's just two people working together. Next thing you realize, they're talking over each other. So I love asking those questions, really getting to know the other individuals on your team that you do work with. I do think it's really beneficial within those first 30 days. Know who your core team is, who can you rely on, who can you go to for answers, and who can you have help you out during that time.
Yeah. So first 30 days, we touched on, understanding, really getting to know the product. This is kind of more focused on the sales engineering perspective, but some of these things can be used for all jobs. But learning the product in and out, developing your demo script, learning and getting to know the people on your immediate team, the auxiliary teams, and then all of the other teams. I think you should at least meet with one person per department minimum, and more the merrier. The first 30 days, you're most likely not going to be thrown on a lot of customer calls or outside work per se. You're really focused on ramping, and so part of that ramp, take advantage of that time, because once you start putting on customer calls and prospect calls and working deals, it's really hard to do that. Those were the main takeaways of the first 30 days. So now if we transition over to the second 30 days, 30 to 60, at this point, we're comfortable with the product. We have met the teams around us. What should we be thinking about now in the next 30 days, Ryan?
From a sales engineering perspective, improving the demo script. The script that you created on day 10 or day 15 should not be the script that you are using on day 40. This is where you need to start iterating on that script. You're going to start thinking about the common objections that you're hearing. You should have better answers to those questions. You should also be playing around with the way that you're responding to common objections too. You might think that one way you're saying something's working really well, I'm telling you right now, try to challenge yourself to think about other ways to describe it. And you might be on a call one day and you'll pull out a different way you say it, and you'll watch the prospect's face totally change. And you'll say, that's how I should be responding to this. So don't get comfortable with just the way that you've been doing things. Push yourself to iterate and keep on developing against your original demo script. I think it's a pit hole that probably a lot of sales engineers fall into, is like, hey, I'm demo certified. I'm just going to do this basic gold standard demo every single time. The gold standard demo is not going to help you stand out amongst your colleagues. It's not going to help you close as much business as possible. You should be constantly iterating on the way that you're answering questions, the way that you're throwing in jokes or storytelling throughout, and you should be improving that. Also, at this point, you might have been on a couple of calls. You can start leveraging those calls for storytelling. Hey, you know what? I actually heard that the other day. I think it's one of the easiest things to do as a sales engineer is talk about the other calls that you had. You know what? I was just on the call the other day with a prospect that told me it was taking them X amount of time to do X thing. Awesome. They're already starting to think of you as an industry expert, even just by doing that little bit of storytelling. But this is where you should, really be enhancing your product knowledge. So continuing to really get to the nuts and bolts around the product. So that way you, as the technical expert, really know the most challenging questions is probably around that 30 to 60 day window. I would even go up to 90 days because depending on the product that you're working with, within 60 days, it's unlikely for you to be the total product expert on it. During my time at NetSuite, it took 7 months of intensive training to learn the entirety of an ERP. And I can tell you that there were still product things that I just didn't know and understand. But that 60 to 90 day window should be really getting to know the product intimately. But this is also where you should be enhancing your industry knowledge. So learning more about the industry as a whole. What are best practices for this industry? What are some common analytics that maybe your prospect cares about? What's the average, for my industry, what's the average time to process an invoice? Bam, I can know that, I can put that out there. It's a really good thing to work on during the 60 days. So improving the demo script and ultimately becoming an industry expert is where I see that 60-day window shaping up. You've already built the personal relationships. Now you should be building that intimate relationship with how you sell the product and also your knowledge around the product itself.
Yeah, some actionable little pro tips with that, understanding like the industry best practices and whatnot, is look at the events that the company is going to. Those are going to be the events within the industry. Look at what type of talks there are. That's what is the most top of mind about the industry right now, because there is a conference on it, and the conference is getting a speaker to talk on a particular subject really tells you that this is something that the overall industry is caring about. And so use that to help build your knowledge. To add on what you've already said for that first 60 days, I think there's also time for you to now understand the internal processes of a company. Hey, how do feature requests work? How do I, give feedback to my sales reps for calls? How do I talk to my manager about getting feedback on my own demos, right? I'm already on calls, getting feedback early and often. And by the end of 60 days, you should be somewhat demo certified. Mm-hmm. I think that you need to at least give a demo internally to the other SCs on the team. I would say right after, probably between the first 30 and 45 days, mm-hmm. you should have at least done one demo to the internal team. It can be shit. It might be, that's totally fine, but you need to get it. You need to get it in. I remember the most nervous demos are always those internal ones, because mm-hmm. you're talking to the people who demo and show the product for a living, and they are the experts. And I remember me, you and Curtis, just ripped me apart asking these obscure ass questions that no prospect ever asked me, but you guys would do it on purpose just to throw me off. But because of that, whenever a prospect was really difficult on a call, it was easy. So really, one of my old managers, he called it DDO, early demo often. And I think mm-hmm. that's really important as you're getting comfortable, is get that initial end-to-end demo in, that Harbor Cruise, Charter Cruise demo in those first 45 days. And then those 30 to 60, understand those internal processes. You're going to run into stuff like, hey, why are we doing it this way when we have to go to a marketing event? We're doing a webinar. Like, how is that decided? Help me understand. How do I get put on deals? What is the deal assignment? Is this a round robin? Am I paired up with an AE? Who decides that? Is it by region? Understanding those internal processes of how your job function works is something that should happen within that next 30-day window, the 30 to 60.
Yeah, I would reiterate. I mean, I think for most products that are out there in the marketplace, you should probably be demo certified by day 30 to 45, somewhere in that window. Obviously, businesses might call for it to be sooner, or you might have a little bit more luxury to actually go through and learn the product. Samir, I love this idea of demo early, demo often. I'll tell you that for me, even as I'm getting ready for those first initial demonstrations, even before I'm meeting with a customer or prospect, right? I'm building out my internal flow. I'm driving in the car or I'm taking a walk, and in my head, I'm thinking about that demo flow. So I'm starting here. I'm starting to go through what that looks like in my head. I'm starting to think about the questions that may be asked to me during those different pieces. All right, I get through that flow. I move on to the next piece and I start rehearsing that. So that way, the first time that I go for that internal demonstration or that customer demonstration, I'm ready to go. And I've already thought about some of the questions that they might ask if I was sitting in their shoes. So that way you're just ready to go. Now, for any sales engineers that are out there and you are at your current job and you're maybe interviewing sales engineers or bringing new SEs on and onboarding them, one thing that I will challenge all of you is make those internal demonstrations the absolute hardest on the sales engineer. That will prepare them for the toughest and hardest customers ever. During my time at NetSuite, I remember my manager at the time gave me an absolute fit over one piece of reporting. We spent 30 minutes during my demo with him on this, and I just couldn't get him off the topic. After the call, I'm obviously feeling like, oh man, I bombed. I don't know how to handle it. And he's like, look, I really appreciate that you just took it with positivity. But my goal for you was to challenge you with the 1% of prospects that are just relatively mean. And it's going to happen. So if you can simulate the hardest questions that are going to come up or the hardest objections or even the hardest of personalities that somebody may encounter, it's going to allow your SE that's being onboarded to be really successful. So that's why we were tough on you, Samir, as you got in. But we wanted to make sure that you didn't run into a customer that you weren't going to be able to handle, because every customer from there on out should be the easier demonstrations that you're giving. So I do think that's really important, and something that you can do to help benefit your overall organization is just internally, things should be hard because externally it should get a lot easier.
100%. And I love what you just described as you were in the car. You're doing mental run-throughs. I actually just wrote about that, and it reminded me of when I would at dance, we would do mental run-throughs. We would play the mix. We would visualize the different moves, the different times where we want to add our own flair, we call it nakra, and ways to do things. So mental run-throughs are huge. Kobe, Steph Curry, always imagining shooting that three and getting it in. Every professional athlete is doing mental run-throughs. So those visualizations and mentally walking through, huge thing that will ultimately prepare you for every curveball. Now, we hit that 60 days. We're demo certified. We understand our internal processes. Between the 60 and 90 days, I think one thing at this point, we should be on customer calls with a senior person behind us, just being ready to parachute in if needed, but they're there for backup. I think at this point, one thing that we did forget to mention, during the 60 days, we should be shadowing calls with the senior.
Definitely. Watching on Gong, shadowing whenever possible. The more calls that you can watch, the more objections you're going to hear. So you'll hear different variations of how the objection sounds, but you'll know how you want to respond to it. Make sure that you write down what those common objections are. If you are joining a new SE org, they might already have like a guru article based on what those common objections are, especially even as you're an account executive as well. You should be going through the materials that the SE team has built or that the product team has out there. Because the more you know about the product too, the easier it is to sell, because you'll hear some challenging objections even as you're going through an initial discovery call to move to a demonstration. And the better you know the product, the more you can get the prospect excited for that first initial demonstration. So I do think that's super, super important.
Absolutely. So 60 to 90, right? We're running our own calls. We have backup. At this point, we should also be starting to get comfortable with running a POC with backup. As a sales engineer, one of the primary things we do is running POCs or POVs, proof of concepts or proof of values. And that's when we are the quarterback. That is our domain. That is what we own. So the next 60 to 90 days, that 30-day chunk, we should be, being able to start to run those with backup. I think that we need to get confident in what the process is. 30 to 60, we learned internal processes that included how do we run POCs. 60 to 90, we have an opportunity to spearhead a POC. You take it, you raise your hand. You say, hey, I'm ready. Ryan's behind me. He got my back. If I have questions, he'll help me out. The beauty with every SE organization that I've joined, everyone is willing to get your back. You ask for help, you're never alone. You might be on a call by yourself, but you have the whole team behind you. And I think that's something that you can take a lot of solace in, and knowing that you're not alone. Even though you might be running the deal by yourself on the call in front of the prospect, behind you, you got the whole team.
I think too, another thing I'll throw out there about sales engineers as a whole, I think most of us just genuinely like to help others. So when people come to us say, hey, I need some help, most SEs I found in my career are all like jumping on the opportunity to help somebody else out. So don't be afraid to ask for help. The phrase at Hogwarts is help is always given at Hogwarts. I like to say the same thing at the company I'm at, right? Like help is always given if you come ask me. Just again, make sure you do that initial research, because I don't want to answer questions that I've already documented elsewhere. Another thing I'll point out about like the 90-day mark, where you should be running full customer calls. This is where you should be understanding a little bit more about the competitive marketplace as well, because you're going to be on some customer calls. They're going to say, hey, we're evaluating, this product or that product. You should know a few bullet points about those different products to help you sell a little bit more effectively. Now, some organizations will have a competitive center of excellence where you can actually go and find the information about the companies that they compete with most often. If you don't, this is a good opportunity to raise your hand and actually build something out, something that I did here to help our team and just understand what some of the different competitive companies were. But it helps you sell a little bit more effectively. So I think around that 90-day mark, again, we're improving the demo, we're continuing to enhance our product knowledge, we're running customer calls, and we're starting to get on proof of concepts. But this is where we should really be improving or up-leveling our game too, by improving the storytelling and the competitive aspect, understanding who do we compete against, what does that look like, how do we do it. So Samir, I think a good way to probably wrap up today is just, what are some high-level tips or tricks that you would give? We talked about the mental thinking about a demonstration. I think that's good overall, even if you're a rep and you're wanting to give pitches. What is that pitch? You meet somebody in an elevator. What is your elevator pitch? In fact, not only what's your 1-minute elevator pitch, you have somebody that's not that interested. What's your 15 to 30 second elevator pitch? You should know how to tweak up or tweak down what that pitch looks like based on who you're meeting. So you should be rehearsing what that is. Now, sales isn't rehearsed by any means, right? Like it's always going to be whatever you hear, you're taking it, and there's this level of improvisation to it. But by having rehearsed answers in your head, it allows you to spin off those improv sort of answers to any question or objection that you may hear. So I do like to mention that just from like the mental aspect, I really think that's one of a super important tip that can get you up to speed at a company. I also think the other piece there too is use all the resources at your disposal. Go grab that knowledge base, comb through it. Comb through any videos that you can find, whether they're recorded calls or they're videos that exist on Gong. The more you watch, the more you see, the better you'll get at just understanding everything that may come your way. And then use the other tools that are out there. We have tons of AI tools that can help you learn an industry overnight. Also, YouTube. Like, to me, YouTube is one of the most powerful tools that we have at our disposal. You want to learn something about a competitive company to you? Guess what? They probably have a product demonstration online that you can watch. Go watch that demonstration. Check out their website. I think, to me, like, those are a couple that jump off. I'm not sure, Samir, if there's anything you want to add to that.
I think one more thing I would add to that, especially around that 90-day, is understanding your customers and their use cases. Ryan, you made a great point about storytelling and tying previous prospect calls. Tying customer stories interwoven into your demo, you're showing a particular product or a feature function. Hey, XYZ customer actually was using this and they achieved this result. So being able to weave that in and learning those customer stories towards around that 90 days is probably another thing I would add. Something that Ryan and I actually did, we created a Google Doc for you all, a little bit of a cheat sheet. We'll be linking that down in the description. So take a look at that. It'll lay out some of our thoughts of how do you best achieve the first 30, 60, 90 days and beyond. And with that, this wraps up our second episode of Diaries with the Sales Engineers. And we're super stoked to see you guys next time. Peace.
Yeah. See y'all next time.